Well, so now you see why we thought we would start with stories. So, Kimba, Sue Ellen, Judge Pratt, thank you so much for being willing to share your stories with us. So as I mentioned earlier, we are honored to have our country's Attorney General here with us today. I love saying that, Attorney General Lynch, yes. Or as Loretta, as I like to call her, has been a driving force behind criminal justice reform, together with many members of her team. In fact, could I have everyone from the Justice Department stand up for a second so we can recognize you? She came with her peeps. And this is a big day for the Justice Department. They have new announcements that they made today. And so to keep all of you current, I thought I'd start by asking the Attorney General to give us a description of what came out today.
Thank you so much, Valerie. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here, for working on these issues, for caring about these issues, and for answering in advance the ask to keep working on these issues, because so much of what we've done over the last 8 years has been inspired by your work, by work done in the states, by work done by community groups to raise attention to issues. And so I'm just tremendously proud to work with all of you and to have been able to move this important issue a little bit further down the field. We do have some exciting things happening, and they're exciting to me because we've been working on re-entry issues for some time now. It's really been a focal point of our criminal justice reform work. So I'm excited because of the actual announcements, but I'm really excited because these are changes that we're making within how we handle re-entry within the Bureau of Prisons that will live on past this administration, that are going to become part of the DNA of the Bureau of Prisons, so that as we deal with federal inmates in this country, we have some major changes going on. So there's three main things we're doing within BOP, and then a fourth one that I think is hopefully going to help another important issue, which is women who are incarcerated. First and foremost, as we've talked about, education is the key to successfully coming back home for so many people. The ability to get a job depends very often on things as simple as the ability to read, and things as simple as the ability to actually get a license or a certificate, and as things as simple as getting a GED. So while we have always worked within the Bureau of Prisons to put forth educational opportunities and to have programs, we are taking a comprehensive, entire system look at the Bureau of Prisons, and with the help of outside experts and a number of people at the Department of Justice who have worked very hard on this, essentially we will be setting up what will in essence be a school district within the Bureau of Prisons, so that every inmate entering federal custody will receive an educational assessment of their needs and of their issues, particularly of learning disabilities, and an educational program to help them achieve their goals. Now, if you want to do what a lot of people do and reduce it to cost, for every $1 we spend on education in the prison system, it can replace $4 to $5 we spend just on incarceration alone. That's been enough to get a lot of support for issues like this one and other things we're working on. The thing that we're really focusing on, not just the financial cost, the hard dollars and cents, but the human cost of incarceration, the collateral cost, the cost to individuals, the cost to families, the cost to communities, the cost to our culture of removing people from being able to participate in this country's economy for a number of years and sending them back home still not able to participate. So the educational opportunities that we're going to be providing, whether it's a GED that's needed, whether it's further education, whether it's the basics of learning how to read and manage things, which again sends people on this upward trajectory that will, and we've seen it work, that will not only empower them, but allows them to be better parents, better siblings, better family members, and have a real chance when they come home. So that's the first thing we're working on. The second thing, which may sound like a small thing, is we will be providing for everyone who's leaving federal prison the ability to obtain, if they don't have it, a birth certificate and government ID. We started talking about this actually back in the spring when we were doing Reentry Week. We were trying to highlight all the things we were doing. And I wrote a letter to all the governors in the country, as well as the mayor of DC, and asked them to please set up a program, if they didn't already have one, to take federal prison ID and convert it into state ID. Because one of the things that we've seen is one of the biggest stumbling blocks to just re-entering life can be identification. Who are you? Who are you? And who gets to say who you are? And everyone coming out of prison should be able to come back as a whole person, not just a number that's been assigned some years before. And it also impacts the ability, not just for transportation, but to even enter into a building to apply for a job, to get a job, to get a student loan. It's one of the things that people who haven't been through that experience, I think, take for granted the most. And if you don't have that, if you've been stripped of your identification, literally, as an inmate, and then don't have a chance to regain it when you come out, it can be a huge stumbling block. So we will be covering those costs. Some states already do accept our ID, and we commend those that do. Many others responded to our letter, and they're working on programs also. But this particular program will make sure that every federal inmate does come out with ID. The third thing that we're working on, as you know, there's a bridge from prison back home. Typically, they're called halfway houses. The official name is residential reentry centers. And a lot of people don't know these are run by private companies. We've done a study of the ones that are affiliated with the Bureau of Prisons to see how are they carrying out the mandate to be the bridge from the institution itself back into the community. And while some of them are working very hard and are in fact doing a good job, it has not been up to what we want. And so we've taken the time, we've engaged consultants, and we are now, as of today, setting forth new standards that all of the halfway houses have to meet. Not just standards for the buildings, but standards for the services that they provide, the reentry services, the quality of people who are going to be providing important services to people who are dependent on them for that time being. So those are three very important things that we're focusing on. The Deputy AG, Sally Yates, will be here later. She and her team have worked really hard on this, and she's going to be talking about that. The other thing that I want to announce is something that has been in the works for about 3 years. And you may ask, why am I excited to announce that FCI Danbury is reopening, that we're reopening a federal prison? I'm excited because it's one of the few women's correctional facilities that we have, and it had to close for renovations several years ago. And for federal prisoners, for women who were incarcerated in the Northeast, it meant that they could no longer stay in that area, and they had to be incarcerated outside of the Northeast area, either in West Virginia or points west. And as we know, when you incarcerate a woman, you actually really incarcerate a family. And as we've heard talk about, and thank you, Kimba, for sharing that story, you know, you have to think about what does it mean to be a mother when you can't see your child or when you can't hold your child. So we are reopening FCI Danbury, and at the same time making sure that Danbury is equipped with some of the things that we are rolling out throughout the entire Bureau of Prisons, which is intensive mental health treatment for inmates who require that. Because again, it is true. Our prisons, not at the federal level, not just federally, but at the state and local level, are the largest largest housing facilities of people with mental illness in this country. And I will tell you, when I travel the country and talk to law enforcement, sheriffs in particular will say this to me, and they'll say, we know that's who we're housing and we could use help with that. So at the federal level, particularly for women who have not had access to that treatment, Danbury will offer that. It will also offer a residential drug treatment program known as RDAP to deal with one of the main reasons why so many women fall into the system in the first place, which is through addiction issues. So we're tremendously excited to be able to roll these out. This will continue long after I'm out of this chair and someone else is there. As will the commitment to people like you who've been in the field, who've inspired us and given us examples of what works and what's been effective, and not only reducing the numbers of people who are incarcerated in the first place, but also making sure that there really is a bridge back home. So thank you for letting me make these announcements today, Valerie.
Good news. So, Loretta, one of the areas that we, together with many folks in this room, have been working on for a long time is criminal justice reform legislation at the federal level. And notwithstanding the bipartisan support, both within Congress in both houses and outside with their stakeholders, we've been unable to get a bill on the president's desk. But you, and through the Justice Department, have taken several steps on sentencing. So I was hoping you could talk about what you've been able to do through your executive authority to reform the way that we are sentencing people right now.
Thank you. We're actually tremendously proud of the work that's been done. Under my predecessor, AG Eric Holder, back in 2013, we unrolled the Smart on Crime reform. And it was a different way of looking at how we charge and sentence federal prisoners, particularly the low-level nonviolent drug offenders. A.G. Holder, like myself, had been a prosecutor a long time, had been involved in working in this field in the 1990s, when we began to see the prison population swell because of the war on drugs. And when we also saw that prison population swell because of the high mandatory minimums being applied across the board, unilaterally, without really a real regard for why they were even crafted in the first place, which was to go after the kingpins, the large-scale dealers, the huge traffickers. It turned out that they're not the easiest people to catch. It's easier to catch the low-level people who are moving things from point A to point B for someone else, or who are hiding money or holding things for someone else. And if in fact you do that, and that's the only person you have in your net, that person takes the whole weight. And so there are people still incarcerated who are doing someone else's time in that sense. And that was the phrase that people used, which was, you weren't the kingpin, but you were on the hook for the entire weight of it. And so we began to look at whether that was really working. And we saw, again, because not just the financial cost, but the human cost of that, and comparing it to how we sentenced for other crimes also, that it was not the most effective use of our resources. It also was a huge financial drain on our system, a system that needed more resources for community policing, for example, for mental health treatment, for example, and services that we need to provide to people across the whole spectrum of the criminal justice system. And so A.G. Holder empowered prosecutors to look at the entire case and look at the whole person, and to, in fact, charge and ask for sentences that focused more on that person's own culpability, and to eschew the harsh mandatory minimums unless we were really dealing with the trafficker, the kingpin, the person who deserved it. And as many of you know, it got a lot of attention, and it was somewhat controversial at the time, and people, longtime law enforcement partners of ours, committed to public safety, committed to making sure the system worked, had concerns. Are you still going to be able to keep people safe? Are you still going to be able to hold people accountable? Will people still cooperate? And what we've seen is that we have in fact reduced the use of mandatory minimums significantly. People still cooperate with us and achieve those benefits and hopefully get reductions there. We've been able to maintain levels of safety in terms of dealing with narcotics cases, and we're focusing now on those serious offenders. And while the number of cases may have gone down somewhat, the sentences have gone up because they're being focused on fewer people who are more deserving of them. And it's tied in with everything we've been doing with the Clemency Project that you mentioned also. In conjunction with the changes in sentencing that the Sentencing Commission made as to how we sentence narcotics cases, we began to look at those cases to say, if they came before us today, how would they be treated? If they fall into certain categories of the low-level nonviolent offender, and they've already done certainly around 10 years, which many people have by now, would they be in the same situation today? And the answer for so many people is a resounding no. And that's led to the review and led to the suggestions and recommendations to the president that we're so tremendously grateful he's been able to review and also grant.
Great, great. So we've been talking about what you've been doing for sentencing reform, the courtroom, and we've also talked about the cell block and after. But obviously the work that came out of the 21st Century Task Force on Policing, the implementation of that. Your office is really principally responsible for that. So perhaps you could quickly take a couple of minutes and describe to us the progress we've made since that report was issued.
You know, that report was one where I thought one of the best parts about the task force was that it wasn't just focused on law enforcement participation. It was very important that obviously we have law enforcement, but a number of people in this room worked on the task force. We had community leaders, we had educators, we had people who had seen the system from every possible angle and were able to sit down and all lend their voices to what does 21st century policing really look like, particularly at a time where I think we all have to agree that the relationship, particularly the lack of trust between law enforcement and the communities that we serve, has led to some major problems within our communities, within our criminal justice system, and just in people's relationship with government writ large. Not just police, but government writ large. And so dealing with that and looking at some of the root causes of it, I think was one of the main benefits of the task force. And so I was tremendously proud to be able to actually travel the country and focus on police departments that were doing well with particular pillars or particular foundations of that report. And if in the interest of time, I'm just going to talk about two of them really briefly because there were so many that talked about building trust, also training, using social media, all because the overarching view is transparency and accountability. But in the area of training, I was able to visit some police departments that are doing some really groundbreaking work in de-escalation training, in looking at how do we police today. When you interact with a civilian, you know, how do you look at that civilian? What are the circumstances that make you react one way or another? And how do you keep from going down the traditional path of confrontation that we have seen have tragic results? I mean, we're talking loss of life. How do we get away from that model into one where we reduce the tensions and everyone gets to walk away and go home safely? And so I've seen police departments throw themselves into this. And I've seen police departments do work, and I've been actually tremendously pleased to see law enforcement speaking out about this issue at times, talking about some of the cases that we have seen where they also feel things could have been handled very, very differently. So that's a tremendous benefit of that, to get that discussion out there. And also talking about the use of social media, which sounds more like, you know, how do you tweet and all this, but when you talk about transparency and accountability, using the tools that we have to tell the stories that we have has been vital to opening up this conversation. The viral videos of police misconduct and people losing their lives have led to a discussion that has been so vital. Using those same tools to open up for the community so the community can see how law enforcement operates. How are they trained? You know, what is a day at the academy like? What is a day on patrol like? Why are they responding to a particular area here? And the community can then be involved in that. They can come down and watch training or join or participate in it. They can help shape it. I've seen that happen as well. So that kind of transparency leads to greater community involvement in how we police, because this is interactive. This is not just one department saying, this is how I'm going to handle this community. The community has to be involved in determining what kind of police department you have. You have to tell them what the issues are, and you also have to tell them how you want to be treated and insist on that. And all the tools the 21st Century Task Force has given us have enabled that to happen, and I've seen communities make some wonderful strides along those areas.
Great, thank you. So now I think we're going to open it up for some questions, and if you would just raise your hand, our teams will come over and get the microphone as close to you as possible. They're not going to let go of the microphone because we know what happens when we do that in the interest of time.
Sure. Hi, my name is Sujata Balaga, and I work with the Restorative Justice Project at Impact Justice. And in my restorative justice work, we're really moving towards more pre-booking and pre-charge diversion and trying to help local police departments and prosecutors work in that context. It feels particularly important given the potential change in culture, climate practices, to be thinking on the local level. That's definitely the buzz I've been hearing amongst my colleagues today. And so from that side, what we're seeing at the local level is some really impressive data, both in terms of recidivism reduction and victim satisfaction with this pre-booking and pre-charge models. And so I'm wondering, as we're moving forward, what it is that can be done at the federal level in terms of incentivizing, both culturally and otherwise, prosecutors, law enforcement, et cetera, to work in the pre-booking, pre-charge diversion context in restorative justice and in other things that are seen to be effective in areas like victim satisfaction, community involvement, recidivism reduction, et cetera.
One of the things that we've seen that's been very effective at the federal level are sort of diversion courts, like you mentioned, either drug courts, have been very effective. They've often been sort of ad hoc, and different federal judges will have different programs for that. We have been trying to use some of the budget savings from, again, reducing the cost of incarceration to also fund programs and grants that help communities have standardized methods of having things like drug courts and diversion programs, because they're very, very, as I'm sure you know, they're very labor intensive. And so if we can share best practices, if we can share the practices that work with more and more prosecutors and judges, we can in fact leverage that and expand that model. So that is one thing that we are working on. And that also comes from a lot of local involvement. So drug courts are one of the most visible ones. The other ones that we're working on expanding are veterans courts. What we are seeing a lot of when you look at how trauma affects individuals, we're looking at a lot of individuals coming to the criminal justice system who are veterans, who are suffering from PTSD and other related traumas, and whose behavior reads criminal, but it is based in trauma and illness. And so we've gotten a lot of support for that as well. This is something that I will tell you, every federal prosecutor's office has been involved in diversion programs over the years. We are trying to make sure that it is across the board and that we have standardized ways of looking at that as well. And so you will see that continue, I think, because that it's been proven to be very, very effective in helping people recover from either an addiction or a traumatic situation. It can lead to sentencing reductions, again, reducing the cost of incarceration, both physical and personal, and getting better outcomes for us all. I would say that what's so important, though, is to find those programs that are successful now and, number one, support them and bring attention to them. Because I think the work that we're going to be doing in years to come is going to be focused on these local programs that have done well, but also the federal ones, but these individualized programs that have done well and convincing more judges to adopt them also.
Thank you. Another question? She did that very politely.
I really tried.
She said she wasn't going to give you the
You can't let go.
Juan Cartagena, Latino Justice Peralta in New York City. Attorney General Lynch, we applauded seriously the move by the Attorney General and Bureau of Prisons to cut off the contracts with private entities that run prisons in the country. Could you please tell us the status of that now? What can we do to help make sure that's a reality? And also, what can we do to get DHS actually taken on seriously?
So, well, thank you for that question. We were looking at the private prison issue for quite some time. Certainly, we had been concerned about conditions in the prisons that were being run for profit and by private companies, and we were able to have some reviews done that provided us with hard information that they were not living up to the standards of safety and efficacy that we had in our other Bureau of Prisons facilities and that we should demand in every facility. And this is the safety of inmates and officers alike. We tend to forget, but everyone's living in that prison all together. So for us, we were able to set up a policy that called for a review of them all. And because contracts come due at different times, as you know, in the whole procurement process, we will phase them out, beginning with those that are ending sooner rather than later. I know that there is concern as to whether or not that policy will be reversed, but that policy was also motivated and made possible by the fact that we had been able to reduce the federal prison population. Now, we're still overcrowded. We still have too many people for the facilities that we have, but that number of overcrowded, the amount of overcrowding has really come down and is projected to continue to drop, even as we continue to live up to our important public safety obligations. So we feel that the financial issues will be a huge incentive to continuing to phase out the private prisons, particularly those that did not have adequate safety records, where they had safety records that were well below our standards. It's very hard to justify spending money on an institution that was not living up to those standards, particularly when you no longer need those beds. Now, I know we've all seen reports that DHS may move to using some of those facilities for their uses also, either as detention centers prior to adjudication or prior to actual deportation. And so I think that's really going to depend a lot on where immigration policy goes. And that, unfortunately, I'm not able to predict, but I know that people are looking at a lot of different factors there. And what I would say, though, is that even if DHS were to enter into a contract with that, the issue is, again, how do you enforce the safety standards and the quality of life standards that are so important for correctional facilities? And that's where the focus will have to be. Making sure that if those facilities are being utilized, that there is some kind of review process there to make sure that they meet those standards. Because we talk about it in obviously these clinical terms about standards and safety. It's human life. It really is human life that we are responsible for while people are in our custody and in our care.
I think it's time for one last question, Valerie.
Yep.
Hi, Rashad Robinson with Color of Change. Good to
Rashad.
see you again. So I appreciate the opening for sort of points, and in particularly on the first three, I'd be interested if you could say more to the room about sort of the confidence in knowing that they will move forward beyond the life of this administration, both in terms of funding and enforcement. And I say that because we're in a room full of advocates and funders who have moved us to this place because of vigilance, organizing, and activism, and the road ahead is gonna need all of that. And so if you could say more about not just those three sort of announcements, but sort of the vigilance, the organizing, the activism, the work that's gonna be required of this room and for the folks that we're connected with in order to keep in place the things that have been achieved.
Well, with respect to, I thank you for that, Rashad, and I think you've really touched upon the key issue for this convening and conversations like it. We're, as I said, we're very proud of these initiatives because they will live on after us, because the structure has already been set in place. And in many instances, we've begun that work. And so the Bureau of Prisons is on that path. And so we're confident that the Bureau of Prisons leadership will continue these initiatives because they're effective initiatives. Educational programs also improve safety in correctional institutions for the inmates and for the correctional officers. That's in everyone's interest. They do reduce recidivism. That's in everyone's interest. The ID issue is one also that has been proven to be such an effective issue for people. So we don't see any strong policy desire to change them, but we do think people have to be vigilant and make sure that, in fact, they do continue. But the Bureau of Prisons leadership has worked very hard on this also, and so they've set these programs up. But there's so many other things as well that we talk about by way of policy, and someone could have a different view on things that are important or not. I tend to think that we're on, frankly, the right course in so many of these important areas. But as I said before, a lot of the impetus for the changes that we've made, the ones that I've mentioned and so many others, have come from outside of this city. Look, Washington is a great city. It's a beautiful place. A lot gets done here. But it is not the incubator of every great idea. It just isn't. I mean, we have been so tremendously fortunate to have an administration, to have staff, and to have a president who has picked up these issues and made them his own. But we didn't always have that, and everyone in this room works for people and works with people who know what it's like not to have that kind of presence and support in this, the greatest house in this country, but they also know how to make their voices heard when that's not the case, because that's what they used to do. That's how we got things done before. And now I think people have seen how we implement policy, how we make change, and I urge all of you to hold on to those lessons. Hold on to those lessons and use them. Hold on to the accountability that you've seen. You know, federal agencies have to give reports on certain types of activities. You know, people now know how to look at those things and see what's being done. You know how to raise things to the attention of people who make decisions here. And don't discount that your voice, you know, won't be heard either on some of the important issues of the day. As Valerie noted, the issue of sentencing reform and the issue of people noticing not just the fundamental unfairness in so many aspects of our criminal justice system, but the toll it's taking, both financial and human, was one that captured bipartisan support. People that were unlikely allies came to the table and said we have to do something about this. And I guess I'm still optimistic enough to think that they did that because they saw the issue, not just because of who was here in the White House. And so go to those same people again. You know, keep that debate going. Keep those issues on the table because people have noticed this. And once people see something and notice it, it does not have to go away.
I think Loretta makes a very good point, and I feel your level of anxiety, and I know that that anxiety is kind of the elephant in the room here today. But I think that momentum, I mean, we've been fortunate to have a president who started as a community organizer, so he appreciates the fact that it's important to bring everyone in and work on these issues together. And I often joke that when people are protesting out inside, in front of the White House, that I want to say, just push the door. It's actually open. You can come on in and talk to us. And we know that's not always going to be the case, but I think that our government will only be as strong as we make it. And that applies not just at the federal level, but at the state and local. And keep in mind, the vast majority of people who are incarcerated today are at the state and local level. And it is on the ground where so much important work is happening right now, state by state. And that work enjoys, as Loretta said, bipartisan support, not just among elected officials, but among the business community, the faith community, people who are fiscally prudent, people who understand the importance of our society being one that is humane. And so you all have huge power and agency to use your expertise, your voices, your passion to continue this work forward. And you do right by the work that we have all collectively done together to continue with that same level of dedication. And as Loretta again said, it should not depend on one person who occupies this office. It should depend on all of you. Thank you very much. Please thank Loretta Lynch for being with us today.